Not all monsters scream. Some reign in silence. And that was Tiberius. The Roman Empire had ambitious, cruel, loved, hated emperors. Some left their mark with wars. Others, with laws. But only one managed to rule from the shadows, on a throne covered by fear and silence. Tiberius was not the emperor Rome asked for. Nor the one they expected. He was the second emperor in history, but the first to abandon the capital to rule the world from a distant island, like a ghost whispering orders and executing punishments from afar. For decades, historians have debated whether he was a perverted tyrant or a misunderstood strategist. Some accuse him of sadism, others defend him as the most lucid emperor of his generation. The truth? Perhaps it hides in the depths of his past, and in the silent walls of his refuge in Capri. Because before becoming the most feared figure of the empire, Tiberius was a rejected child. A brilliant general. A husband without love. An heir without choice. And finally, an emperor who no longer believed in Rome. Stay until the end, because what Tiberius hid on that island, could change everything we think we know about power, madness, and the price of solitude. Before being emperor, before dressing in purple, Tiberius was just a child, one who learned very early that in Rome, love is a transaction, and blood, a tool of power. He was born in 42 BC, in the midst of a Rome fractured by devouring ambitions. The city was not yet the majestic empire that would dominate the world, but it was already a jungle of intrigues where family was not always synonymous with refuge. Tiberius Claudius Nero, his biological father, had been an ally of Mark Antony. His mother, Livia Drusilla, descended from an aristocratic family, cold as the marble of their villas. But none of that prepared him for what was to come. When he was barely walking, his mother was torn from the family home. Octavian, the young politician who would soon be known as Caesar Augustus, took her as his wife. There was no consent. Only power. Livia, still pregnant by another man, was given to the new master of Rome. Thus began Tiberius' emotional orphanhood. He never called Octavian father. But he never again looked tenderly at the man who had begotten him. Rome had stolen them both from him. Raised in the new imperial house, surrounded by statues, tutors, distrust, and silence, Tiberius was invisible in his own lineage. He observed. He listened. And he learned that Roman smiles often hid daggers. While Augustus built a dynasty for eternity, Tiberius was left aside. The favorite was Marcellus. Then Agrippa. Then Gaius. Then Lucius. All fell. To illnesses, to accidents, to ambitions not entirely explained. One by one, the heirs perished. Until only he remained. The son who was never chosen. The young man no one applauded. The general everyone tolerated, but no one loved. His childhood was not marked by games, but by absences. His adolescence knew not desire, but duty. His youth knew not love, but emotional exile. To seal his integration into the imperial lineage, Augustus forced him to marry his own daughter, Julia. A free, intelligent, and scandalously unfaithful woman. Tiberius, reserved, almost monastic, despised her. She ridiculed him in public, insulted him in private. It was a cold, calculated, and cruel marriage. He could take no more. And one day, he disappeared. Not by decree. Not by order. He exiled himself to Rhodes. There, on a small distant island, a Roman general, the most capable man of his generation, asked permission to live in oblivion. Tiberius did not flee from Rome. He fled from himself. He fled from the life he had been forced to live. He lived in Rhodes as an ordinary citizen. He refused honors. He avoided the forum. He walked alone. Some said he meditated. Others, that he wept. But the empire allows no escapes. And when fate did its work, when all the other heirs died, Tiberius was called back. Not as a son. Not as a man. But as a symbol. As a tool of continuity. He returned to Rome. But something in him had already broken. He had crossed the threshold. And he who crosses the threshold, never returns the same. History usually remembers emperors for their speeches or their crimes. But Tiberius left neither. He only left marks, on the maps. If there was something in which Tiberius excelled, it was in the art of war. Not the bloody spectacle of the circus. Not the arrogance of the conquerors. But war as cold calculation, as surgical strategy. While others sought glory with swords held high, Tiberius planned campaigns that were won before the first spear was thrown. His genius was not in hand-to-hand combat, but in anticipating the shadows. He led expeditions in Germania, Pannonia, and Armenia. His troops respected him. His enemies feared him. He was never loved, but always effective. And that, in Rome, was worth more than 1,000,000 cheers. But the silence that accompanied him was not strength, it was a reflection of what was missing inside him. Years of contempt, betrayal, and abandonment had turned Tiberius into a stoic, impenetrable figure. He slept little. Ate little. Never smiled. He commanded, yes. But from an almost inhuman emotional distance. In every successful campaign, Tiberius gained prestige, but lost humanity. Each secured frontier took him further away from any form of affection. Victory had a price, solitude. When his brother Drusus, his only true emotional connection, died after a fall in Germania, Tiberius rode for days alone, under the rain, to see his body one last time. He gave no speeches. He shed no public tears. He simply remained silent beside the corpse, for hours. That was the last time anyone saw him vulnerable. From then on, Tiberius turned to stone. Augustus, growing older by the day, began to reconsider his lineage. The heirs kept dying. The empire was running out of young blood. And so, the emperor resigned himself. Tiberius, the son he never wanted, the silent son-in-law, the solitary soldier, was called back. Not as a favorite, but as a last resort. The Senate approved his return. The people did not celebrate. And Tiberius did not smile either. He returned to Rome as a victorious general. But in his gaze he carried something sharper than any sword, the weight of disdain, and the certainty that he would never be truly accepted. From then on, he became even more reserved. He no longer answered personal letters. He delegated decisions to jurists. He refused statues. He avoided the circus. Rome had given him power, but never a home. When Augustus died, Rome did not acclaim Tiberius, it merely accepted him. Like one accepts winter, inevitable, cold, and necessary. It was the year 14 AD. The first emperor of Rome, Augustus, had died with all the honors of a living god. The Senate wept, the people built him temples, and the poets consecrated him as the father of the empire. By his side, as a successor designated for lack of options, stood Tiberius. He did not give a great speech. He did not offer bread or games. He simply presented the Senate with a dry and distant gesture, if you wish it. I will take power. From the very first day, Tiberius made it clear he did not want to rule. But he would. Out of duty. Not for glory. What followed was a strange government. Sober. Without excess. Without triumphal parades. Without personal gods. Without even appearing often in public. Tiberius rejected titles, refused to be worshipped, and rarely set foot in the Senate. He ruled by decree. He sent letters. He watched from the shadows. While Augustus had understood that spectacle was part of power, Tiberius refused to play that game. He did not govern from the public square, but from his office. In silence. Without smiling. Without trusting. And because he did not trust, he began to delegate. That was when Lucius Aelius Sejanus, prefect of the Praetorian Guard, entered the stage. An ambitious, astute, charming man. Where Tiberius was cold, Sejanus was warm. Where Tiberius hesitated, Sejanus decided. Quickly, Rome began to see in Sejanus the firm hand Tiberius seemed unwilling to offer. But that trust would soon turn into a threat. Sejanus did more than reorganize the Praetorian Guard, he turned it into a political force. He gathered power, silenced senators, made enemies disappear, and little by little, presented himself as the shadow of the throne. Tiberius, locked within his paranoid nature, began to distrust him. He did not speak, but he watched. And what he saw disturbed him. In 26 AD, he made an unprecedented decision: he abandoned Rome. Not out of necessity. Not because of illness. But because he could no longer bear being there. Rule if you wish, he seemed to say to the world. And he retired to Capri. From then on, he ruled like a ghost. He sent imperial letters from afar. Signed sentences. Approved laws. But he never returned. Ever again. Rome, meanwhile, was left under the shadow of Sejanus. It was a government without a face. A power without a presence. A republic without a republic. Sejanus became master and lord of the city. But like any man who shines too brightly, he made a mistake. He underestimated the absent emperor. Tiberius, in secret, investigated him. And when he had enough, he ordered his public execution. The people then saw what many had forgotten. That Tiberius's silence was not weakness. It was calculation. It was control. It was absolute domination without raising his voice. From Capri, Tiberius destroyed his rival without lifting a finger. The message was clear: no one is safe. No one rules but him. And yet, the price was high. Rome now feared more than it admired. The empire no longer felt led, but watched. And high on his island, surrounded by soulless statues, Tiberius kept ruling, without ruling. Rome wondered where its emperor was, and the answer was chilling: he ruled from an island, alone, between cliffs and rumors. Capri was not just an island. It was a natural sanctuary with white cliffs, hidden caves, transparent waters, and a sky that seemed endless. There, atop a rock, Tiberius built his new world. He left behind the marble of the Senate, the crowds, the gladiators, the urban intrigues. Rome was too noisy. Too false. Too full of eyes. Capri offered him silence. But it also turned him into a myth. From there, Tiberius wrote letters that were obeyed as if they had descended from the gods. The emperor was omnipresent, but invisible. Distance turned his figure into legend. And with the legend came the rumors. The historian Suetonius, decades later, painted a monstrous portrait: orgies with adolescents, torture, sick sexual practices, and blood-chilling perversions. Capri, according to him, was a prison of pleasure and punishment, a hell with a sea view. The emperor threw slaves into the sea out of boredom, wrote one. He trained children as human pets, said another. He had secret tunnels where the condemned entered, but never came out. But how much of that was true? Capri became a mirror. And everyone projected onto it their own fears. The truth is that Tiberius did build 12 villas on the island, one for each zodiac sign. He ordered temples, observatories, and enclosed gardens to be erected. He hardly ever went out. He received reports, signed decrees, and watched over the empire from above, like a solitary eagle. Some think his retreat was philosophical. That he was inspired by the Stoics. That he sought a contemplative existence, far from Rome's decadence. Others, that he simply gave in to his nature, a wounded being, distrustful, incapable of love, and eager to control without human contact. The truth is that, from Capri, Tiberius perfected a new form of power, terror at a distance. He ruled by letters. By executions ordered in sealed parchments. By absences more intimidating than any presence. And while Rome trembled, Tiberius watched the sea. Capri was his refuge, his prison, his throne, and his punishment. It was the only place where he did not need to pretend. Where he could be whatever he really was. But even at a distance, the past caught up with him. The plots, the revenge killings, the eternal distrust. It all came back. It all followed him to the island. Because not even the loneliest emperor could escape Rome. Because Rome does not forget its ghosts. When he finally died, there was no mourning. The people did not weep. Rome did not stop. It only shouted a phrase that sums it all up: at last the ogre is dead. Tiberius died in the year 37 AD, at the age of 77, after 2 decades of rule and more than a decade of seclusion in Capri. Some say it was in his bed, others claim he was smothered with a pillow on the orders of Caligula, his designated successor. The truth is that his death was not met with grief, but with relief. But was he really a tyrant? Or was he simply the most honest reflection of the price of absolute power? Because behind his cold mask, his lethal decisions, and his voluntary exile, there was also order, vision, and an unsettling efficiency. Tiberius inherited an empire that was still being built. And instead of expanding it without measure, he consolidated it. He gave up unnecessary conquests and strengthened the borders. He ruled with austerity, cut lavish expenses, and stabilized the imperial economy. He reformed laws. Punished corruption. He cared, almost obsessively, about the state's finances. On one occasion, he even used his own money to prevent a financial collapse after a banking crisis. He was the only emperor who, instead of giving bread and circuses, gave something quieter, but more lasting: balance. And yet, Rome does not forgive coldness. His hermetic nature, his decisions in the shadows, his secret trials, and his emotional distance made him an object of hatred. No one can love someone who does not let themselves be seen. His figure was demonized by historians who wrote years later, many of them in times of crueler but more charismatic emperors. Caligula, his successor, destroyed his public memory. He ordered statues removed, prohibited his name, and transformed the people's perception with lurid stories. Thus, the emperor who never wanted to be emperor, ended up being the most feared. The most solitary. The most misunderstood. His legacy was contradictory. A skilled administrator. A brilliant military leader. A distant leader. A symbol of terror. A man who feared love as much as power. A strategist who ruled without speaking, and who died without being heard. Today, modern historians are beginning to reassess his figure with new eyes. Far from sensationalism, some see him as a pragmatic politician ahead of his time. Others, as a wounded soul who never found peace. And perhaps that was Tiberius. Not a monster. Not a sage. But a warning. A reminder of what absolute power can do to a man who, deep down, never wanted to rule. Rome called him emperor. History called him a monster. But perhaps Tiberius was just a man who no longer knew how to feel. From a distance, Tiberius created a model of faceless power. He reigned without crowds, without heroic gestures, without statues in every square. But his presence was felt in every corner of the empire. Like the wind that cannot be seen, but moves everything in its path. He was an emperor who hid. From applause. From politics. From love. And finally, from himself. Was he cruel? Perhaps. Was he brilliant? Without a doubt. Was he free? Never. History is written by those who survived. By those who knew how to act better under the lights. Tiberius, on the other hand, chose the shadows. And in those shadows, he was swallowed by Rome's ghosts. Today, 2,000 years later, we are still asking ourselves who he really was. A silent despot. A martyr of power. Or the mirror of what the empire could do to a rootless soul. And you, what do you think? Was Tiberius a villain or a man broken by fate? Leave us your opinion in the comments. We want to read your interpretation of this complex figure. If this video made you see history from another perspective, share it. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the shadows of the past. Because understanding the men who ruled the world is understanding the mistakes we are still making.